Thank you, Beverly McGrath, ASPCA. In the interest of time and in consideration for the committee members, I will be brief. I concur with all of the statements that have previously been made. I would just like to say that on the surface, this bill appears to be very reasonable. But the first indication that it may not be is all of the lobbyists and the organizations they represent that you have been inundated with, and they are ranching and hunting interests. And I would like to say that our organization feels that the intent behind this bill is to remove more horses from the range and to allow the permits to be given for water to the ranching community and not for the horses. Thank you very much.
Carla Bowers, members of the Senate Natural Resources Committee, Chairman. This letter, I'm actually going to be reading this from the phone here. This letter is written on behalf of the Western Watersheds project. I'm just here reading this for you from them. They are a nonprofit conservation organization whose mission is to protect and restore Western watersheds and wildlife through education, public policy initiatives, and litigation. It's absurd to claim that wild horses are damaging the range when livestock outnumber wild horses by at least 50 to 1 on Bureau of Land Management lands. In reality, it's privately owned cattle, not wild horses, that are devastating vast tracts of public lands in the West. It is well documented that the #1 threat to the ecological balance and Nevada range is the grazing of livestock. The prominence of livestock on the Nevada range is long known to have a devastatingly detrimental impact on the land, riparian areas, ecosystems, and wildlife. Western Watersheds Projects urges you to vote no on AB 329. And if I may just quickly interject my own personal comment just quickly, just for your perspective. And I'm sorry I don't have Nevada numbers off the top of my head, but I just want you to realize that in the 10 western states, that livestock that graze BLM lands number from 1 to 3 million animals. We have 1 million head of elk in the nation. We have 780 pronghorned antelope. We may have, if we're lucky, 20,000 wild horses in the state of Nevada. I believe that there is many less than that, but 18 to 20,000 is what BLM estimates. I believe it's maybe half that, if that. But again, we need proper census to really tell what's out on the range. We do not have the proper studies censusing at all. I just want to share with you that the livestock and the wildlife outnumber the wild horses in Nevada and throughout the 10 western states by tens of thousands of animals. Please take that into consideration, and please allow the wild horses and burros in the state of Nevada to be designated a beneficial use of some of Nevada's water. It really is all about sharing and them getting just a fair share. Thank you.
What do you think is if we have 18 to 20,000 wild horses in Nevada, what do you think is a manageable number to be able to handle in our state? Because I hear from people saying there's not enough food, they're starving, we don't have proper management. So I'm just trying to, because I don't know. So if you have some insight in that, just briefly, if you could respond.
Well, the main problem here, Chairman, is that in the state of Nevada, many herd areas and original herd areas and herd management areas have been zeroed out completely of wild horses and burros. And so what is happening is that as the lands are being squeezed down further and further, the actual original acreage that were given the wild horses and burros back in '71 have been minimized by at least half. Back in '71, there were 53 million acres in the 10 western states allocated to the wild horses and burros. Today, we're at less than 26 million acres in the 10 western states. So what's happening is that they're getting squeezed and squeezed and squeezed on the land. So of course, there's going to be less forage for them and less water for them because there's less land than was originally allocated to them. So we have to stop squeezing them off. What's happening is that more land and rather forage, land and forage is being allocated to livestock and for benefit of wildlife. And we're not against certainly any of those uses of public land, but the wild horses and burros are losing their forage and their actual land acreage. So it's actually the allocation of forage and water that is the question. The AMLs, we go back to appropriate management level. On the herd management areas in the state of Nevada, it should be considered that at the least, the wild horses and burros would get 1/2 of the forage and the livestock could get 1/2. Right now, today, they're lucky if they get 5 or 10% of the forage and water on their legal HMA. So we have a very strong discrepancy between forage and water allocation. So what you're hearing is just a very brief or just a very small piece of the puzzle of the story. You're not really hearing the whole story. I hope that helps a bit, Chairman.
Thank you, and I appreciate that response. Thank you.
I very much appreciate the opportunity to address you, and I appreciate your attention and probing questions on this. Obviously, it's a very divisive issue.
I need your name for the
record.
record.
Yes, my name is Lars Hansen. I'm a Nevadan. I actually don't represent any organizations. However, I'm a lifelong horseman and skier. I learned how to do both here in the state of Nevada 50 years ago. I currently live about 10 miles down a dirt road from the Palomino Valley Wild Horse facility, and am a manager for actually a llama sanctuary, and thank God we have our own private water, so it's not an issue there yet. But I'm very, very concerned, and I don't want to reiterate what the other folks have said before me. I think they've done an excellent job, and I certainly concur with them very, very strongly. I've worked as a law enforcement officer at both county and federal level. I'm the biographer of the most decorated Green Beret in history, actually 2 books. And what I'm very concerned about is the wording and the language here. The point's already been brought up several times. Why is there such a need to differentiate wild horses and burros as a class? Some very, very light scientific or allusions to scientific evidence have been brought up by those people in support of this bill to say that they aren't necessarily wildlife, when in fact the history clearly demonstrates that these horses antedated probably human life in North America. But just as an example, and I appreciated your question and concern about the improperly named Annie Oakley Act, the Wild Horse Annie Act, as your assistant pointed out. I think it's a very, very cogent point that the original act prevented rounding up by helicopters and other motorized vehicles, and even when the act was amended 12 years later in 1971, lo and behold, encroachments have been made which now permit wide-scale roundups by helicopters. And I'm not going to bore the committee with the horror stories, but they are absolutely nauseating of the damage and the harm that is done to these horses in that process. So my main point, I don't want to be...
I want to say this personally, I think helicopter roundups are horrible. To do that. I'm sorry, I didn't interrupt.
No, I actually, believe me, I sincerely appreciate it, and I appreciate your concern about all this. What I'm very concerned about, having worked in law enforcement and so forth, is the nuance of language, and very often what is not said. You know, we heard, and I should also add, I've worked on ranches. I've worked on very large-scale ranches with millions of acres of allotments. And I want to second the comments very briefly of some of the other women, that the damage that is done by livestock compared to wild horses is monumental in scale. Worse, the data and the systems, the AMLs or MLAs or whatever, that is used by the BLM to justify roundup and slaughter is atrocious. One word I have not heard here at all today, with all the constant reference to wild horses, which presumably refers to those under the jurisdiction of the federal government, are the estrays, which are in the state of Nevada, which are not protected. I mean, they're notably not only not protected, they're being hauled off by the hundreds, if not thousands, directly destined to slaughter. So my point is that it's a very slippery slope that we're moving down here, even though you gentlemen have heard all these assurances and we're supposed to feel assured that this wording will in no way take any water away from wild horses, and that this is merely an effort to try to prevent federal encroachment and land grab. As a former federal officer myself, I am extremely suspicious of that. 20 years ago, I had occasion to assist the most decorated Green Beret in history to keep from going to federal prison, and his whole defense turned on one single word, which was literally, specifically, the word another. And it would have been a travesty had that happened. So that, more than anything, is my big concern here, to look very, very closely what the true intent and purpose is of basically segregating these animals as a class from wildlife. You know, just because they might even be formally classified as wildlife does not automatically imply that they would be hunted. So I am very, very concerned that this particular phrase, this whole bill turns on this one particular phrase to reclassify these animals, which I feel, and I concur with all my previous colleagues, is strictly, ultimately destined to deny them water. Thank you very much for your time.